Okay, I'll just do a countdown with my fingers because it's a bit easier. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Provoke Media podcast. My name is Arun Sudhaman. I'm editor in chief of Provoke Media. This podcast episode is titled Igniting the Industry, Making Change with Purpose. And we are here, as you might imagine, to talk about the Young Changemakers program that we've been very happy to support and work on with We Communications. And so I'd really like to start this by asking our three speakers to introduce themselves. And I would like to start perhaps with Melissa Wagner Zorkin. Melissa.
Thank you very much, Arun. It's a pleasure to talk about this, one of the topics that's most important, really, I think, to us, but more importantly to our industry. I'm a global CEO of We Communications, and I have the honor of partnering with Provoke Media to actually be part of the inaugural and now the second year Young Changemakers. And I just have to say, this is Mubashira's show for sure. We will learn a lot from her. We will feature the kinds of things that she really is thinking about. And so I'm really excited to hear from her.
Yes, I can only echo that excitement. So no pressure, Mubashira, but
No
over to
pressure
you,
at all.
please.
Thank you, Arun and Melissa, for that introduction. My name is Mubashira Faruqi. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada, and I'm currently a senior consultant at Fleischman Hillard High Road as part of our reputation and global diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. I'm also the host of Color Me PR podcast, jumping on the podcast train here. And that is where I interview women of color in the communications, media, and creative fields about their journeys, challenges, and experiences in the industries. I had the incredible honor last year of being one of the inaugural Young Changemakers, and I'm really excited to chat with you all about it today.
Thanks, Mubashira. And yes, it was actually our honor to recognize you, I feel. And we were so impressed actually by, the energy and attitude and eloquence you brought to the Young Changemakers program. We will talk through some of the things we hope that the Young Changemakers program will accomplish, and why that's so important. Why that's so important. Let's start there. I wanted to ask you both why you think the Young Changemakers program is important, and what you hope that it will accomplish. Melissa.
I'm actually going to start, if I could, Arun, with a question for Mubashira, because I think that the main opportunity and also challenge here really is to bring more great thinking and not just diversity in representation, but diversity of ideas and the way we do things, and challenge this industry and kind of turn everything upside down. So I would ask you, Mubashira, what would make you, and you already have a career in communications, crave, and bring some of your young friends into this industry in terms of a career that you would keep for a long, long time?
That is a heavy question that I bet a lot of young people aren't thinking through enough right now. But the fact is that communications is an industry that really holds so much power. As communicators, we are responsible for carrying and for sharing the messages between organizations and people, between you and I. And having that responsibility, I think it's incredibly important for us to share our voices. The younger generations, Gen Z and Gen X now, that are coming up, everyone's talking about what we're thinking about, what we're planning on doing, but not enough people are asking us directly what we think about the world, about this industry. And I think the incredible thing about the Young Changemakers Award is that you've brought us to the table. Finally, someone's asked us to be part of this conversation, and we're happy to share. A lot of us are happy to share what we're thinking, where we think this industry is headed, and what's really important to us. And honestly, it starts with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's why I really respect the fact that this award is for young women of color who are otherwise facing barriers in succeeding, and this is breaking down those barriers.
Very good question, Melissa. Thank you. And it made me think, Mubashir, when you mentioned that people are not listening enough to younger people in our industry, and in particular, younger people of color and people from underrepresented communities. And so I wondered if maybe we could just, you know, digress a little bit. I'm curious to hear, what do you think of the public relations industry as someone who's coming in from a group that is underrepresented in our industry, if we're being honest? And how do you view it, and how do you see it in terms of accessibility?
So I think the one thing that really stands out to me as someone who's still relatively new to this industry is I think myself and my generation were really turned off by the selling, markety type of language. We really want to see, our leaders and the organizations that we represent show us their authenticity, right? If they're sharing that they're committed to sustainability or equity and inclusion or work-life balance or any of those things, we want to be able to see that from organizations rather than in an ad. Sorry, Arun, your question has slipped my mind. Do you mind asking again, if that's okay?
No, it's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
It's a big question, actually, and it can be a tough one, I think, but because it's somewhat open-ended.
Mhm.
But your answer is actually a really good one. I was just curious to hear um, how you see the industry as someone who's coming into it from an underrepresented group, and in particular how you see it in terms of access for people coming, trying to access this industry, and whether you think um, it's moving in the right direction, and whether you think it's perhaps moving quickly enough.
Absolutely. So in terms of access, I think right off the bat, there isn't enough representation in this industry. And that's why I ended up launching the podcast that I did, is because I felt like there wasn't enough representation of diverse perspectives and lived experiences. And those are critical
Mhm.
for us as communicators and as leaders in the consultation that we provide to understand these diverse perspectives. And I just don't feel like we've seen enough of that. It's gotten a little bit better in the last couple of years as we've started. I'm in a DE&I consulting role as well, so I'm seeing things evolve pretty quickly. But I think the one thing that our industry really lacks is that culture of openness, of welcoming different perspectives, and not just welcoming them, but creating the opportunities, the stage for those perspectives. Again, this award, the Young Changemakers Award, is unlike anything else because you haven't just welcomed us to, a podcast alone, or you haven't just welcomed us to the summit. You've literally created a new stage for diverse young women to share their voices and their perspectives. So I think that's one of the things that we are slowly getting a little bit better at, is creating these spotlights for young voices. But I think that needs to become the normal. I'd love for us to get to the point where these types of awards or these recognitions aren't one of few or one in a million. This shouldn't be the diamond opportunity, the one opportunity. This should be how we treat our young professionals across the industry.
Arun, if I
Melissa,
could jump
yeah.
in, one thing that, do you mind just can I add something here? Mubashira and I were talking, and one of the things that stuck with me was how in a simple form, we talked about how if we're talking to the world, we're trying to make change in the world, we're trying to have the communications industry and the real power of it, rise to a bit of a higher order to really influence outcomes and impact. How can you do that if you don't have a representation of the world? And it was really simply put when she and I were talking about it, that reflecting what the world is something that the communications industry really needs to think more about. And it's not just numbers, although it is numbers, person by person by person, but It is the way we think, the way we do things, the way we come up with even the programs and the counsel that we provide, and the way we treat one another and build our companies. So I really love that when she and I were having our first conversation, where we really talked about, if you're speaking to the world, you should be speaking to the world with something that's reflective of what the world is made up of.
How important is it to develop a program like this, given some of the headwinds we see out there, and some of the narrative we see in the media? You know, there seems to be a rise of a kind of a anti-woke movement. We're seeing suppression of education in certain places. How much is that a driver here for the two of you?
Do you want to begin?
You can go first, Melissa.
It's incredibly important, Arun. You know that I think that, but just talking about it doesn't really explain why I think that. I think that because for me, it's a business imperative. There are many, many important aspects of having, obviously, a very diverse set of people who are, making up the entire company. But I think from the standpoint of the way things are today, I go again to the higher order of, we're not understanding one another in this world today. We're not debating civilly. We're not talking with one another in ways that actually tries to respect a different point of view. And the world's doing that in many, many different places. And so for me, it's not just about building a company with revenue and clients. It's about thinking through what is a dire need that the world has right now, which sounds lofty, I know, but it's true. How do you get to understanding a different point of view and moving someone to think differently? You listen, you communicate, you use what we should be good at. So it's imperative. And to your point about anti-woke, and I know Diana just wrote an article on this, which I hope people will read, around some of the research is indicating that not many companies really, at the end of the day, are backing off of ESG and the component that's DEI within that. Companies are going to stick to it. It's just a question of convincing some who aren't sticking to it that it's a business imperative.
Mubashira?
Yeah, I especially when it comes to the anti-woke piece, I think about, for a lot of people that exist as part of an underrepresented group, or, for me as a woman of color and a visibly Muslim woman, I've always had to deal with these challenges. There's no break from it, right? Day in and day out, I am being challenged by those who are unable to see my perspective or why it's truly valuable. And at times it can be pretty exhausting. But the matter of the fact is that we have to keep pushing forward. And I think that's what I find really incredible about the younger generation, is just how resilient we are and how unwilling we are to accept defeat or accept an answer that isn't satisfying for us. We're willing to push forward and challenge perspectives that are different than ours as well. So I think we will always be ready to challenge those perspectives. We will always be ready to use our voices as a beacon of light and hope, and hope that others will hear us and create more opportunities for us to share our voices. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, thanks for that. And yeah, thanks for not giving up. What does it look like when you both of you have talked about the importance of pushing forward, and I think sustaining the momentum. So in the case of Changemakers, for example, last year in the program's first year, we recognized 3 people. This year, I think the entries have just closed. We have many more entries, I'm happy to report. I think we're going to announce the 3 winners on International Women's Day on March 8th. So we're all looking forward to that. But what does it look like when you talk about moving forward in terms of trying to sustain the momentum and trying to build on what's already created? And I'm curious to hear that from a kind of an individual perspective. How do you yourself kind of bring these commitments to life? Melissa, let me start with you again, please.
I first want to say that while we're partnering, Arun, with Provoke Media, that this is something that we not only welcome, we just encourage in every single way, every other participant possible. And there's nothing about it that should be competitive, or, I mean, there are many times when we should compete. And then there are many times when we should not. And this is one of those, and I mean that. And it'll only show up in the doing, really, as we start to see a flavor across the industry of the applicants and the winners, and it itself being very broad. So I wanted to start with that this is not about my company. It is about, and it's not really about yours either, you know, it's about everybody joining and really making their face by face, you know, a much bigger group. With regards to our company, those setting goals, you know, we certainly do have KPIs. We certainly do have numbers that some we do well on, some we don't do well on. But the more important thing is, are we open to changing the nature of what we provide to clients? Because we have these young voices on our teams. We have these young voices telling us even how to run a company, which is a question I actually asked one of our change makers. If you were me, what would you do differently? And so I think it's an improvement. And I look at from our, you know, CEO as an individual, I look at it as making our company a better organization to work in, and a better place to be safe in, and just a better, you know, citizen, if you will, of the world. Does that answer your question?
It does very much, and I couldn't agree more. It really isn't about our companies. It's far more about the program and the work that's being done. Mubashira, over to you.
Yeah, if I can add to that, actually, I think it's a testament to the organizations that nominate their young people for this award, because, like I said earlier, you know, a lot of us young folks, we want to cut through the fluff and see what you're really about. And if you're nominating, if you really want to show that you're an organization that values the voices and perspectives of its diverse young professionals, then you'll create opportunities for them that go beyond yourself and your organization. You know, my company, Fleishman, they didn't get much out of me receiving this award beyond, you know, the insights I got from, you know, attending the summit, or from, you know, building my career a little bit further. But I could choose to leave tomorrow, and that wouldn't benefit them in any way. But the fact is that they are on this mission to be one of the most inclusive agencies in the world. And part of that means showing up for your young people and championing them wherever you can. And so, you know, this only helps instill our trust in our organization further when we know that you will support us in putting us forward for these opportunities, because the doors that this opens for young people, and especially for myself, you know, I come from, you know, I come from two immigrant parents who absolutely do not have the means to be able to send me to major industry events, or to be able to facilitate the opportunities for me that I've been given through this award. And so this literally does open new rooms and new spaces for young women like myself. And to know that my organization was the one that put me up for this opportunity and allowed me to reach this point, it means a lot, and it further strengthens my commitment to them. So it's something that I hope that other leaders will think about. If you have an exceptional young person on your team who you love working with every day, you know that they change, you know, they are able to change perspectives, that they speak truth to, you know, every opportunity they approach. Those are the young people you want to nominate for these opportunities, and who you want to show that you value them as a person above all else, and you want to be an ally for further opportunities for them.
You see how incredibly well said that was.
Well, it's so interesting, because the answers both of you have given really speak to how important this is, you know, at a kind of fundamental level. And I sometimes think in this industry, we, you know, like any industry, I'm sure, people can get a little distracted or focused on short-term targets, short-term goals. Melissa, you mentioned um, you mentioned KPIs, I think earlier on in this discussion. And I just wonder how that conversation fits into all this. Is this something you build KPIs around? Is this something that you are kind of measuring on a day-to-day basis? Or do you feel like it's just something that's, in a way has to be part of the DNA of how the industry operates?
Both,
Mm.
and both in a very rigorous way. I think that the goal, of course, is to make every decision through the lens of, are you doing it the right way? Not just to fall on the right side of history, but because, again, face by face, person by person, you are open to those ideas. They are able to do their best work because you've created a place where they can do their best work. And that takes a long time. And that does then lead to the other piece, which is KPIs that year by year you examine, you're transparent with. And this industry has talked a lot about that in terms of what are the right numbers, what are the right ways to call accountability out, and what are the right ways for us to trade information on what's worked and not worked in a really non-competitive and non-threatening way, so that we're all working towards the right things. I mean, both in sustainability and in DEI, we have very firm DEI goals that go down to varying levels based on what each individual can do. And we have a structure now that we're beginning to look at, even from a compensation and bonusing kind of thing, where if our top leaders are not achieving these things, you measure it, you get it, then they don't achieve the same level of reward. And so not every company's there yet. And that's a difficult one to do, because you have to word it the right way and it has to be doable. But that's where KPIs kind of goes together hand in hand with the other piece, which is, the bigger belonging, feeling right in an organization, having a safe place for people to really be who they are. Does that answer your question from my perspective?
Yeah, very, very much. I think it's such a good reminder of the incentives and the accountability that are required, um, along with how important this is just from a kind of fundamental value perspective. Mubashira, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this as well. How do you see accountability in the PR industry in terms of its approach to DE&I? Are you happy with what you've seen, and do you think there are improvements that can be made?
Truthfully, I think the accountability when it comes to DE&I goals and initiatives, it's a little bit gatekept from the younger, more junior members of the organization. And maybe not on purpose. Maybe it's just that, for a lot of organizations, their DE&I goals are still pretty new, and they're still sort of working out how to divide the responsibilities or what those goals look like within their leadership team. But I think it's really important to communicate that with the junior folks in your organization as well, because they will be able to identify gaps for you that you may not have seen otherwise. They'll also be able to contribute a little bit more of that real perspective based on lived experience. We trust our leaders. Of course, they have a ton of experience, but at the same time, they may be a little bit removed from the day-to-day impact of the DE&I work. So really getting their perspective from the get-go, I think is really important. And also sharing your strategy and your goals with the junior folks first also helps make you more accountable, because trust me, they will be asking you about it. They will be asking you a month later, where did we reach on our goal? For example, again, FH's goal to be the most inclusive agency in the world. We're asking our leaders daily, how are we progressing towards this? What's changing to help achieve this? So I think, sharing that with your young folks really helps add to that accountability.
And in our company, there are some areas that we're not doing as well as we should be doing, for sure. And our means has been to go in and talk directly to every single person, to your exact point, as far as not just staying at a superficial level, but what really happened here. Where did it happen on the continuum? Was it on the hiring, onboarding, okay, managerial, okay, promotion? Where was that really? And can you understand every piece of that? And we're not there yet, but that's the questioning, I think, Mubashira is telling all of us is that if you can get into that level of detail with people and just be open, and even if it feels bad, which it can, like, oh, today it was a bad day, it's still, you know, what we must do.
And Bashra, what's your advice for people that are entering change makers? Maybe they've entered, maybe they win, maybe they don't win. Um, but what's your advice to them in terms of how they can contribute and how they can make their voices heard? Because
Mhm.
it can be quite intimidating.
Absolutely. Well, to start off, I think everyone that applies is already winning. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but let me explain why. When I applied for the award, there is an application process. You do have to complete, share sort of a background of who you are, what you've done. For me, that process of completing the application itself was almost therapeutic, and also was sort of a moment for me to give myself the kudos that I hadn't really stopped and paused and taken the moment to do before that point. So for me, the moment I hit send on that application, I felt like I had already won. Like I had finally taken a moment to appreciate the work that I had done, the value that I bring to the table. And, whether or not I actually received the award was a different story because, again, it was an opportunity for me to really, really understand and put myself first. So first off, if you applied, you're already winning because you just put together a phenomenal portfolio of the exceptional work that you're doing and why you're so great. And then my advice to, change makers, for anyone that's applied, is it doesn't stop at this award. Whether or not you win, you use this portfolio to continue championing the work that you're doing yourself. We look to our mentors and we look to our allies to really help uplift us. But a big portion of that responsibility and having your voice heard is it starts with you using your voice and sharing your voice. And so I think my advice to anyone applying for the award, considering it, and hopefully to our winners as well, is let this be the starting point of the incredible things that you do going forward, of the rooms that you choose to enter, and the people that you engage with. This is really just the starting point, and really soak that in. And again, use that portfolio for every opportunity you get going forward. Tell people what you've done, why you're so great. And sometimes, eventually, actually, you won't even have to tell them. They'll just be able to see it.
If I could just stay with you for just a second before I come to you again, Melissa. Mubashir, have you found that people are always in this industry, they're always receptive enough to, your thoughts and your views in terms of well, whether it's in terms of change or not? Do you think that there is enough receptiveness?
So this is an interesting question, because I think when it comes to global conversations, there's definitely more openness to it. I'm really grateful that I work for a global organization, and I have the opportunity to engage with other global leaders on this subject. But I think when it comes to talking to people in your neighborhood, or attending some of those like local communications events, it's a little bit tougher to get your voice out. So in those settings, what I find is it's really important for me to find ways to find a bridge and a connection with others before I necessarily approach them or enter that room. I want to find what brings us together, to be able to help initiate some of those relationships and conversations. And I find right off the bat, just telling someone, oh, I'm from your alma mater, or, I work in the organization you started off in, it helps create those bridges from the beginning that help others be a little bit more receptive to what you're coming to say. And again, I am a visibly Muslim woman, so I can tell a lot of times when someone is hesitant to approach me or hesitant to enter a conversation with me. But all I can do is sort of live by example, and I smile a lot. I think that really helps people feel a bit more comfortable. But when it comes to like my professional sphere, I think it's consistently showing people that I am open to learning and that I am open to having conversations, especially when they're challenging or it's something that I don't understand. I think that encourages people to be a little bit more perceptive than to my point of view as well. I guess that kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Arun, about listening more. And Melissa, you mentioned this as well, starting off by listening.
Melissa, I wonder if I could flip the question to you. How do you? I think it can be intimidating as well for leaders in this industry to listen and to accept sometimes new points of view. So how do you kind of advise your own people and counsel your own leadership when it comes to helping them progress in terms of that kind of change?
Yes, this is a great question because it's one of those intrinsic values that organizations need, not a pin on, not an add-on where, oh, let's give it to so-and-so. No, it's stopping and saying, the way we've composed this team, have we been thoughtful? Does it represent in a very fair way all the best that we can possibly bring? No, it does not. Okay, do we have it? What do we have? And so I think that the first thing is that the art of delegation is changing significantly, where instead of saying, all right, so I have a accomplishment that I'd like all of you to accomplish, you basically say, this is where we want to go. We want this group that represents all the good things that we think the client or our own internal problem should be tackling, and then go do it, rather than a leader who will say, well, it needs to look like this, and that's what success looks like. So that's the first thing, is the way you set up project management, the way you delegate, the way you really say, hey, I'd like this done by you. What is your idea? Is a significant start. The next thing, though, is all managerial, and that's around managers who understand that success is not in just one frame. And often organizations, we are guilty of this sometimes too. We define success the way we think it should because we just were successful and we work again and again and again. And if we don't challenge that in terms of what should success look like, so we can rebuild our system to output something different that looks different, and success could look completely different, then we're really not mixing it up. We're really not changing, and we're really not open at all. And so for those of us who have had some success, I'm a work in progress. Some I have, some I haven't. We have to challenge ourselves as CEOs to say, it doesn't need to look like that. Try something different, and don't be afraid of the mistake, of the risk, and of the way you communicate about it and even reward. It has to be a much different managerial approach as well.
So not necessarily easy, but definitely doable from your perspective.
On a good day, it's natural. On a good day, it comes out of you, and you wouldn't even look back on the day and say, I did it, and it's some checked box. On a good day, it would be our organization is highly functioning because people all feel like they can do their best work, but that's a long road. We didn't get here as an industry overnight either. And so it is going to take one by one changes to understand, how can we tackle this all along that continuum? But yes, it's doable. I am super optimistic. And how could we not be optimistic listening to, everything that you said, Mubashira, is just so, not only articulate, but prescient about where our industry should go. That gives me huge optimism that it's doable.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So just a couple more things we might want to touch on before we close the discussion. Are there any specific areas where you see concrete change needed, in terms of perhaps the educational systems that, often serve as a kind of launching pad for people into this industry to change? How agencies, for example, look for young talent need to change at all? I'm curious to hear your views on those kinds of issues. And I don't know, either of you can go first.
Sure, I can kick it off. The first thing that comes to mind, which is one of the topics at our last Provoke Summit in Washington, was time entry. I think it's the one thing all junior folks coming into the industry can can agree on in the agency settings is it's not a good measure of the work that we're doing and the quality of that work. I think that's something we probably struggle with a little bit, but I think also, I'm so sorry, Erin. Can you share the question one more time?
No, no problem at all. I'm curious to hear whether you think um, the educational kind of systems,
Yes,
whether it's the
education.
4-year college degrees, whether it's graduate programs that, develop people, our industry careers sometimes, whether those need to be rethought and whether kind of we need to be perhaps looking beyond some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of key areas that I think, for myself at least, when I did my graduate certificate program in public relations and corporate communications, I think my favorite part of that program was the fact that we had a course called Storyworks, where we would engage with an actual client and put together a communications plan and execute on it for an actual real life client. And that was probably one of the best learning experiences for me as a student. But I think where the gap is between the education and then entering the industry and working in the industry is the specific niche areas of expertise. We're learning them too late in schools. I think they need to speed up
Mm.
the way that we update the curriculum based off of, these aren't just industry trends. These are really, for example, like, one of the courses that we had in college was data and analytics, which was really, really informative. But graduating out of the program, we're immediately talking about AI and now ChatGPT and all of these topics that are way beyond just the basics of data analysis, right? Like this is something that I think, at least speaking of Toronto and Canada, I think our institutions can do a little bit better of preparing students for is tech specifically. And I think, Melissa, you could speak to that a lot better than I could probably. But also really preparing us for the mental resiliency it takes to succeed in this industry. Because
Mm.
as communicators, we are constantly engaging with new learning, with tough topics, especially when it comes to DE&I. As an example, when I first started in the industry, I was doing a lot of those basic beginner responsibilities, right? Media monitoring, preparing daily reports. And right at the start of my career, you may have heard in Toronto, there was an incident with the Muslim family being run over by a van and basically being murdered. And I was in the role where I was having to read the news cycle every day and prepare a report on what's happening and reading these details. And it became really difficult to engage with that work. And it
Mm.
was hard for me at that stage of my career to share with my leaders, to no fault of their own at the time, but because there was sort of this pressure that I had to succeed no matter what. I had to do this work no matter what. There was no concept of, you have the option to say, this is too much for me to handle at this point in time. And, uh, especially when you're trying to build that really great reputation for yourself, you don't want to immediately say, this is something I can't do. So I think in college and university, there's that expectation that when you get to the workplace, you follow what they say, you never say no to the work, you get right to work, you start at 6 a.m. in the morning, and you don't worry about working past 8 p.m. at night. So I think preparing students for, one, how challenging communications work can be at times, but also informing them of where they can draw those lines and create boundaries for themselves to protect their peace. And
Mm.
I think, again, with the younger generations and Gen Z, we really like to protect our peace. We really value work-life balance. And I think our industry is starting to do a little bit better with that through the pandemic, and working from home has created a little bit more balance for us. But I think our organizations can definitely do a lot better in that area. That was a
Mm.
lot at once.
That's a very insightful answer, Melissa.
And I love that last piece, which I'll swing off of in terms of mental health and truly understanding that if you're centered, you're going to give a lot better, centered advice to those around you, and you're also going to show up your team in a much more centered way. And I do think you're exactly right that our industry is go all the time. And I think and I'm not going to say it's just the pandemic. I'm going to say that actually even before that, we decided to take a different turn towards what does a life really look like, and what should we really be thinking about for people, and what should this workplace provide in different ways and unique ways through everything from benefits to the way our managers are trained. So the mental health, the resiliency is a key piece of it. And I do think there's training that the education system can insert into their curricula that will really help. But I will start by saying to your educational piece that I don't think I'll ever be satisfied with the education in this country. And I do hope I'm wrong about that, but I think that I don't understand, like in our industry, why we need 4 years. What's wrong with 2 years? I don't understand why, pay parity can't come earlier. I think there's just these basic fundamental things that we need to re-examine and say, does it really take that to get into this industry? Or can someone just understand critical thinking, business analysis and problems? When does that come in? What's common sense about this? How do you speak truth to power? So there's these different categories which some of the organizations and HBCUs and some of the schools are beginning to teach in new and different ways that I think would be much easier for then people to assimilate into our industry. So when I started by saying, how do you make a young person crave coming into this industry? It's you teach them that they can make a difference and they can have some fun and they can have a life and they can learn things along the way. And I don't know that we're set up for success quite yet. You get them involved, and I thought you made a great point there on tech adjacencies. There are so many technology adjacencies now. And AI is a huge one, all the conversation about what will be displaced, what will be, done in a different way. What about creativity? Those are excellent questions that young people should be able to debate and think about and be part of. And our educational system needs to realize the changing nature of that technology disruption on the communications industry and go somewhere with that in the curriculum.
Wow, I feel like, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Ren. I was just going to say the one thing I have seen change a little bit is some of these educational institutions are now inviting recent alumni to, help evaluate and update the curriculum a little bit. So we are beginning to get to these, updates a little bit faster. But yeah, again, it all comes down to just invite us to the table. We're happy to share. We'll bring some snacks. We can do this.
I think it's encouraging to hear both of you question some of these conventions, some of these orthodoxies that I think are taken for granted. And I think that is perhaps the biggest benefit of programs like Young Changemakers, because I think, that there is no progress unless we kind of have this mindset of constantly questioning everything. Otherwise, I think, change doesn't happen. So I'm really glad to hear from both of you today. I'm a little conscious about time. I think we've already, I feel like we could keep going. There's quite a lot more we can discuss. This is such a huge topic. Maybe we should do another episode at some point. But I'll leave it there for now. And I want to thank both of you, Mubashira and Melissa. I'm sure I'll see you both in person at some point this year. But thank you both for your thoughts and for your wisdom. And we are very glad, like I said, to continue supporting this work.
And I'd say right back at you for seeing the opportunity and for really being, a big sponsor of this. It's just so I'm so optimistic. Thank you for doing that, Arun.
Thank you so much, Melissa and Arun, for this opportunity. I'm so excited for the next cohort of Young Changemakers to meet you, and I'm excited to meet them as well.
Indeed. Okay, thanks everyone, and take care.
Thank you. Bye.